He had brought her a silk shawl from the eastern provinces. This was the detail he would return to. Not the silver rattle for the child, not the journey itself, not the 18 months of campaign that had preceded the return. The shawl. He had found it in a market in the 3rd month of the campaign, the specific market of a city that had been doing what it did for 600 years, regardless of whatever armies passed through it. And the silk had been the colour of the sky at the particular hour of morning when the campaign days began, which was not quite dawn, which was the specific blue of things that were about to become something else. He had bought it because Caroline had once said, one evening, before the campaign, at dinner, the specific casual comment of a woman who was talking at a dinner rather than particularly to him, that she had always wanted something from the eastern provinces, that she had read descriptions of the silk and had thought it must be extraordinary and had never had occasion to find out. He had remembered the comment. He had been remembering it for 3 months, in the specific way of a man who had one of these moments from home every few weeks, the particular memory that arrived and confirmed what you were doing the thing for. He had thought, when I return. The silk, and then the rattle, and then the sitting down somewhere that wasn't moving, and the ordinary evening of a life. He had been thinking about the ordinary evening for 18 months. He had arrived at the estate at 10 in the evening, bypassing the staff because the surprise was part of it. Not a grand surprise, not a performance, but the specific small private surprise of a man coming home to his own house at night after a long absence and wanting the first moments of it to be unrehearsed. He had wanted to find Caroline reading, or at her correspondence, or at whatever she did in the evenings that he did not know, because he had been away for 18 months, and there were many things he did not know. He had walked through the house with the silk shawl in his hand. He had found the sitting room door ajar. He had found, through the door, the specific truth that a man found when he came home to a house that had been a house for 18 months and had become something else while he was not looking. But before we go to the morning, before we follow Benedict Ashmore back through the gate he had just come through, to return the next morning as the official arrival, as the man who did not know, I need to ask you something. If you heard something through a door that broke the most fundamental thing you believed about your life, would you go through the door immediately? Or would you understand in that moment that going through the door was the least powerful thing you could do? Drop your answer in the comments. Because Benedict stepped back. He stepped back from the door and he stood in the corridor with the silk shawl in his hand, and he made the specific decision that would define everything that came after, which was the decision to not react yet, to be cold instead of hot, to be the kind of dangerous that did not announce itself. Subscribe and hit the bell and tell me where you are watching from tonight, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room now. Let's begin. He had heard her voice first, which was the specific cruelty of it. He knew her voice, had been missing her voice for 18 months, with the particular ache of a man who had loved his wife in the honest way of someone who had chosen carefully and intended what he chose. The voice through the door was the voice he knew, and it was doing something he had never heard it do, which was the specific register of a woman who was in the room she was most comfortable in, with the person she was most comfortable with. And the person was not him. He had heard, "Do not worry, Thomas. My husband is completely impotent. He could never give this house an heir. He had stood against the corridor wall. He had heard. He will return, embrace this child as his own blood, and leave everything to your son." He had stood against the corridor wall, and he had felt the specific thing that he would spend a long time afterward finding the accurate name for. It was not grief exactly, though grief was part of it. It was not rage, though rage was in it. It was the specific sensation of a belief system being revised. The rapid, comprehensive restructuring of everything you understood about your life. when the foundation of the understanding is removed. He had been loving a woman who had been using him for years. He had been constructing a future on something that had never been what he thought it was. He had stood in the corridor, and the silk shawl had been in his hand, and he had looked at it in the dark, with the specific quality of a man, holding something that has just become a different kind of object. Not the thing he had bought in a market for the woman he loved, but the evidence of how wrong he had been. He had thought about going through the door. He had stood very still, and he had thought about it. The specific image of himself going through that door, with the sword he was not carrying, with the rage that was available but that he understood, in the cold clarity that arrived when certain things happened, was not the right instrument for this. The right instrument was not heat. He had thought, they do not know, I know. He had thought, they do not know I know, and that is the only advantage I have, and I am not going to spend it on the next 3 minutes. He had turned. He had walked back through the house. He had exited through the servants' entrance, and he had stood in the night air of his own estate, and he had looked at the sky, which was doing what sky did, indifferent, large, containing more stars than any human situation warranted, and providing them anyway. He had walked to the inn in the village. He had slept, which surprised him, and which he understood later was the specific sleep of a body that had been managing 18 months of campaign and had reached a limit, and the body had taken what it needed, regardless of the interior weather. He had woken at 6. He had organised in his face. He had ridden back to the estate. The morning arrival had the quality of an official return. The staff arranged, the greeting prepared, the specific ceremony of a duke coming home from a long campaign. He performed it with the competence he brought to performances, which was considerable because a man who had commanded a military operation for 18 months had considerable experience. With the performance of composure, Caroline came into the entrance hall with the smile he now read correctly. He had been reading it incorrectly for 4 years of marriage, which was the specific self-accounting he was doing in the background of every interaction. All the things he had misread, all the moments he had taken at face value, all the specific ways a man could be comprehensively deceived by a woman who was very good at deception and who had the advantage of his genuine love, which made him less rather than more perceptive. He received her smile with his smile. He kissed her hand with the warmth of a returning husband. He said the things that were said in these moments. Thomas came from the study with the quality of a man who was performing, being glad to see his cousin, and Benedict received Thomas with the warmth of a man who was glad to see his cousin. And the two performances existed in the entrance hall, together with the specific quality of a room in which everyone was acting, and only one person knew everyone was acting. The child was brought. Benedict held the child with the warmth of a man who had come home to his heir, which was the warmth he produced, because this was the performance required. He held the infant, and he looked at the face of Thomas's son, and he felt the specific thing that he was not going to feel in front of these people. The loss, which was the loss of what he had thought was his. The loss of the heir he had been imagining for 18 months, and he put that feeling in the place where he kept things that needed to be managed later. He made the specific sounds of a man holding his child. He handed the infant back to the nurse. He said he needed to rest from the journey. He went to his rooms. He sat. He began to plan. The planning took 3 weeks. He was good at planning. 18 months of military command had refined a capacity that had always been present. The ability to assess a situation from multiple angles simultaneously, to identify the available resources and the available threats. To understand that the effective response was never the immediate one, but the one that accounted for all the variables and addressed them in the correct sequence. The variables were Caroline, Thomas, the child, the estate, the ton, the law, and the specific medical reality of his own health. The medical reality was the one he addressed first, because it was the foundation of everything else. He had not, in fact, been impotent before the campaign. He had been, for 3 months before the campaign's departure, unwell with a fever that had been treated by the family physician, and that had resolved. Caroline had apparently translated this, correctly or in bad faith, he could not determine which, as a permanent condition. He obtained the document from the king's physicians. He had framed the consultation as a routine assessment following the campaign, which was not unusual, and the physicians had been thorough and had produced a document that certified his health in the complete sense. He held the document, and he thought about what it meant. It meant the lie was provable. It meant Caroline's claim, he could never give this house an heir, was demonstrably false and had been demonstrably false when she made it. He put the document in the vault. He turned to Thomas. Thomas, as the estate administrator, had been managing the Ashmore financial interests during Benedict's absence. The managing had been competent by most measures. The accounts balanced, the rents had been collected, the properties maintained. Thomas was genuinely capable, which Benedict had always known, and had been the reason he trusted him with the administration. He was also, beneath the competence, a man who had been skimming. Not dramatically. The skimming was the small, consistent kind that could be attributed to error or discretion if examined by someone who was not looking specifically for it. Benedict was looking specifically for it. He spent 3 evenings in the estate records with the focused attention of a military man reading intelligence, and he found, in the records, a pattern that was not error and was not discretion. He said nothing. He hired a new accountant, framing it as reorganization following the campaign. He restructured the administrative arrangements, framing it as modernization. He routed the financial flows, framing it as efficiency. Each action had its legitimate face and its actual function, and each action was a thread removed from the specific fabric of Thomas's position. Thomas noticed, but Thomas could not say anything without confirming that he understood what was being removed and why. The dinners were the part he found most requiring of the composure he had been practicing. He sat at the head of the table 3 nights a week, and he discussed things with the easy authority of a man who was current on events and had opinions about them, and he watched Thomas and Caroline receive the discussions with the specific quality of people who were listening for what was underneath. He gave them things to listen for. The penalty for lineage fraud under the current statutes, he said, one Tuesday, looking at his glass with the expression of a man thinking aloud, is extraordinary. The case from 6 years ago, the Hartwell matter, the entire family lost everything, property, title, name. He looked up at Thomas. I was reading about it on the campaign. Do you know the case? Thomas said he was not familiar with it. You should read it, Benedict said pleasantly. It's a remarkable legal history. He watched them look at each other. He watched them not look at each other. He drank his wine. Fascinating thing about resemblance, he said, at another dinner, looking at the child who had been brought down for the family portion of the meal. Children often resemble their parents quite strongly, and sometimes they resemble other family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, quite striking resemblances sometimes. He looked at Thomas with the warmth of a man making an observation. The Ashmore family has very specific features, I've always thought, quite distinctive. Thomas's hand, holding his fork, had a particular quality. Benedict smiled. He talked about something else. The nights were the difficult part. He was honest with himself about this. In the specific privacy of his rooms, in the hours that were not required for the performance, he permitted himself to account for what he had lost. It was not as simple as betrayal, which was itself not simple. He had lost the marriage he had believed in for 4 years. He had lost the version of his future that had included Caroline as the person he had chosen. He had lost the specific intimacy of being known by someone who did not know him and had not known him. He sat with this. He permitted himself to sit with it. He did not, in the performing hours, let it touch him. The campaign had taught him this. The ability to contain damage in one compartment while operating normally in all others. He had learned it from necessity and had never expected to need it at home. He needed it now. He organised the christening gala. The christening gala was the specific kind of event that the ton attended with the specific expectation of an occasion. The grand christening of the Ashmore heir, the public celebration of the Duke's line's continuation, an event hosted by a man who had returned from a successful campaign and was now formally welcoming his son into the family name. 300 people. He had organised it with the thoroughness he brought to all operations, which meant he had also organised the specific additional components that were not listed on the formal programme. The King's physician's document was in his coat. The maid's written testimony was in his coat. Her name was Agnes, and she had been Caroline's personal maid for 3 years, and she had come to Benedict 2 weeks before the gala with the specific quality of a woman who had been carrying something and had decided the carrying was done. She had been precise about what she had witnessed and when. She had been precise about what she was willing to put in writing. Benedict had listened and had asked specific questions and had arranged for a solicitor to take the statement in proper legal form. He had not pressed her. He had simply listened to what she had to say. He had thanked her. She was not at the gala. He had arranged for her to be elsewhere, with an employment reference and a sum that would allow her to establish herself somewhere that was not this house. Thomas stood at the front of the ballroom near the christening table, performing the role of godfather with the quality of a man who believed the performance was working. Caroline stood beside him with the quality of a woman whose calculation was still running. Benedict had watched her running it for 6 weeks and had seen the specific evolution of it, from the initial certainty that he did not know to the growing suspicion that he might know to the specific anxiety of a woman who could not confirm or deny the suspicion without revealing that she had something to confirm or deny. He had held everything very still. She had not been able to confirm. He stood at the head of the ballroom. He raised his glass. He looked at the room. The 300 people who had come to celebrate his heir, who were looking at him with the warmth of a social world receiving a returning hero. He looked at Caroline. He looked at Thomas. He said, "My friends, tonight we celebrate the continuation of my line." The room had the quality of 300 people settling in for a toast. But a true duke, he said, must ensure his house stands on absolute truth. The quality shifted. "I have recently discovered," he said, "that my cousin Thomas has been working very intimately with my wife to secure the future of this estate." The room became the specific silence of a social gathering that has received information it was not expecting. Caroline's face did the thing he had seen and not seen for 4 years, the calculation running. Thomas went the colour of a man whose foundation has been removed. Benedict produced the documents. He did not perform this dramatically. He handed the documents to his solicitor, who was present for this purpose, who received them with the professional composure of a man who had been briefed and knew his function. He described the documents, the medical certification, Agnes's testimony, with the specific precision of a man presenting evidence rather than making an accusation. He let the evidence be the accusation. He looked at Thomas. Thomas said nothing. There was nothing to say that was not a confirmation, and Thomas knew it, and the knowing was visible on his face with the terrible clarity of something that can no longer be contained. Caroline looked at Benedict. He looked back at her. He held her gaze for a long moment with the specific quality of something that was not anger and was not satisfaction and was simply the look of a man who has been comprehensively deceived and has now comprehensively addressed the deception. He looked away. He finished his toast. The sentences were executed with the efficiency he brought to decisions he had made completely and did not intend to revisit. Thomas was stripped of the Ashmore name by the legal proceedings that followed, which required documentation that Benedict had been assembling for 6 weeks and which his solicitor managed with the thoroughness of a man who understood the specific requirements of the case. He was removed from the estate, from London, from the specific social world in which his position had depended entirely on the proximity to Benedict that no longer existed. He left with what he had come with, which was very little, and what he had accumulated independently, which was also very little when the skimming was netted against it. Benedict did not watch him go. Caroline went to the convent by arrangement rather than by force, which was a distinction she probably did not appreciate, but which Benedict made because force was not the instrument he had chosen for this. The arrangement had terms that were specific. She would be comfortable. She would be provided for at a modest level. She would not be in London or in any house of Benedict's or in any social world that crossed his. She was not imprisoned. She was simply placed where she was no longer in his life. He did not watch her go either. The child was the most difficult part of the decisions and the most considered. He had spent 2 weeks on this specific decision, sitting with it, turning it over, examining it from all available angles. The child was not his. The child was Thomas's. The child had not asked to be brought into this house or this situation or this story, which was the most relevant fact and the one he kept returning to. He could not keep the child. He had examined this with honesty. The specific honesty of a man who understood that keeping the child would mean raising as his heir the son of the man who had betrayed him, and that this was not something he could do in the way that the child deserved to be raised. The child deserved a father who could love him without the weight of what he represented, and Benedict could not be that father. He had found, through careful arrangement, a merchant family in the northern country, prosperous, established, with children of their own, with the specific quality of warmth that he had assessed through inquiry. He had settled a substantial amount on the arrangement, anonymously, through his solicitor. The child would be provided for, the child would be loved. The child would never know. He arranged for the transfer with the precision and the care that the situation deserved. He sat in his study afterward. He sat for a long time. The estate in the months that followed had the specific quality of a large house that had been reorganized around silence, not the silence of emptiness. The estate was staffed and managed and functioned with the efficiency he had required of it. Not the silence of grief. He was not, he found, primarily grieving, which surprised him and then did not surprise him when he examined it. He had spent 6 weeks in the process of managing the situation, and the managing had required a specific focus that had, in some sense, metabolized the grief into something more directed. He was something he had not been before. He was a man who had been wrong about the most fundamental thing in his life and had addressed being wrong and had come out the other side and was now in the after. The after was quiet. He managed the estate. He attended to the parliamentary obligations that had accumulated in his absence. He corresponded with the men from the campaign who had become, across 18 months of difficult shared experience, the specific kind of friend that was made only in those conditions. He did not attend social events for 2 months. When he returned to the social world, he returned as himself, which was the self that had come through the corridor at 10 in the evening with a silk shawl, and had found the thing he found, and had stepped back and had been, for 6 weeks, the coldest and most controlled version of himself he had ever been. That self had managed everything. He was done managing. He was in the library at 10 in the evening, a month after the gala, with a glass of port, the specific quality of a man who had discharged his obligations and was sitting with what remained, which was himself, which was the estate, which was the long life ahead that was going to be what it was going to be. He thought about the silk shawl. He had it still, had not given it to anyone, had not specifically decided what to do with it. It was in the chest in his room, where he kept things he had brought back from the campaign. He thought about the market where he had bought it, the specific blue of the eastern province's morning sky, the casual comment at dinner that he had remembered for 3 months and had carried home as the particular proof of what he was returning to. He had been wrong about what he was returning to. He was not wrong about everything he had loved in the loving of it. He sat in the library. He thought about this for a while. He was going to be all right. This arrived as information rather than declaration, the specific quality of a man taking stock and arriving at an honest assessment rather than a performance of recovery. He had lost what he had thought he had. He had not lost himself, which was the more significant thing, which was the thing he had not been certain of in the corridor with the shawl in his hand. He had stepped back from the door. He had been cold when cold was required. He had addressed everything that needed addressing. He was sitting in his own library with his own port in his own house, which was his house, which was his life, which was going to be built now on something that was actually what it appeared to be. That was enough. He drank his port. Outside, the estate did what it did. He was home. Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you. Was it the corridor with the shawl, the morning return, and the performed smile, the dinner table, and the Hartwell case, or the library at the end? Drop it below. I want to know what you're carrying from this one, and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next story opens with a woman who arrives at a funeral for a man she was told was dead 15 years ago, and finds him standing at the back of the church. I'll see you there.